Celebrate Zion Lutheran Church, 1923 to 2023, a century of blessings. The birth of Zion Evangelical Lutheran Church began on the second floor of a hall at Woodward and 9 Mile Road in Ferndale, Michigan, on the third Sunday in May of 1923. The first service and those that followed were in response to a canvass made in the community during January and February of 1923, which had been suggested by 3 local pastors who had members of their own congregations living in this area. The first 6 services were held at 3:00 p.m., officiated by the Reverend M. L. Frederick, city missionary. A call was sent to Reverend L. H. Pertner of Bellevue, Ohio. He conducted his first service here on July 8, 1923. 8 people were present to hear it. This small gathering was the first step of many for Pastor Pertner in establishing the church as we know it today. He literally went out to gather the sheep into the fold. Reverend Pertner canvassed the area house by house and sparked an interest within the community because on September 18, 1923, the attendance had increased to 23 persons. Those 23 people became the charter members of Zion, who adopted the first constitution of our church body, selected the name Zion Evangelical Lutheran Church, and elected the first members of the vestry. Plans for the purchase of property and the erection of a church building were made at a congregation meeting in October of 1923. With a loan of $5,400 from the Detroit Mission League, the first 3 lots on Albany near Woodward were purchased, and steps were taken to raise enough funds from Zion's members so the mission board would loan enough money to build a sanctuary. The basement sanctuary was completed on October 18, 1924, at a cost of $23,452. Since 1923, there have been many additions to our church. All have been important in that they have improved the beauty of our physical church and the message she stands for. In 1925, the state of Michigan granted Zion their Articles of Association. The congregation then voted to buy a 4th lot on Albany and build a parsonage for the Pertner family. The lot and house cost about $10,430. And as the city of Ferndale grew, so our church grew in numbers. Confirmation classes through the 1920s. This picture is one of Zion's early children's choirs. Pastor Pertner's daughter, Marge, is holding the baton. On October 29, 1929, the stock market fell, which ushered in the Great Depression of the 1930s. Even in the middle of a depression, Ferndale continued growing. And Zion's congregation continued growing too. Pictured are the confirmation class of 1930, 1931, 1934, and 1938, along with the official charter for the Zion Luther League, 1939. The Zion Lutheran Church Directory of 1936 included advertising for the Spalding Funeral Home and a Hammond organ, which the church purchased for $1,295. It also included the church calendar with meeting times for all organizations and classes. During the Depression, a new heating system became necessary, and $1,190 was raised through the penny a meal plan. The church also rallied to add extra rooms and offices in the basement. The cost was $825, and most of the work was supplied by members of the congregation. The Home Mission Board requested that the congregation consider plans which would enable us to pay the entire debt owed thus far. The Finance Committee selected a funding plan with Lutheran Mutual Life Insurance Company. In the 1930s, we celebrated our 16th anniversary. The poem, "My Church," was on the last page of the 1936 Zion Church Directory. In 1940, architects were engaged to prepare plans for a completed church edifice. The estimated cost of the structure was $74,000. Although our finances had improved in the 1940s, World War II rationing and resource allocations restricted the supply of building materials. It was determined that an additional $20,000 should be raised from the congregation. The quarter-a-day plan was devised to raise the necessary capital, and 30 representatives, each to make 10 calls per month, were appointed to collect jars from the congregation reserved for this purpose. In 1940, Zion celebrated a congregation which included 10 sets of twins. In 1941, we celebrated our 18th anniversary, and in 1944, we celebrated our 21st anniversary. Many members of our congregation and their family members served in World War II, including Kenneth Anderson, Private Edward Lassick, First Sergeant Lee Hetrick, and Glenn L. Krieg. In 1947, the beautiful Moss Cathedral chimes were purchased and dedicated in the honor of the men and women of Zion Lutheran Church who answered the call in World War II, and in memory of those who made the supreme sacrifice. In 1948, we celebrated our 25th anniversary, from 1923 to 1948, and then it was time to complete our present sanctuary. The Zion Lutheran Congregation Church in the 1940s is pictured in front of the basement. This is the marriage certificate for a returning veteran, Kenneth Anderson. The cornerstone to our current church building was laid in 1950. Finally, after years of patient waiting and holding services in nearby Washington School, our present sanctuary, with a seating capacity of 650 people, was dedicated on October 15th, 1950. These are pictures of our sanctuary as it appeared during the 1950s. The 1950s were a time of great growth for Zion. Here are pictures of 2 Zion chancel choirs during the 1950s. Zion had everything going for it, including a bowling league. You will see pictured the Zion Lutheran Bowlers of 1958 through 1959, and the Zion Lutheran Bowling League of 1957 through 1958, as well as a league championship team award. Due to the continued growth of the congregation, 2 important decisions were made in 1957. The first was to obtain a second mortgage from the Lutheran Brotherhood Insurance Company in order to build a Sunday school addition to the church. The second was to extend a call to an associate pastor. Zion installed the Reverend James R. Fuchs or Fox, on June 30th of 1957. You see him pictured along with a confirmation class in 1950. Here are some samples of bulletins for worship from the 1950s, including our 30th anniversary in 1953. Here are bulletins for worship listing both senior and associate pastor during the 1950s. On October 26th of 1958, Zion celebrated its 35th anniversary. Pastor Pertner and his wife Ika were honored at an anniversary dedication potluck supper. The culmination of this week-long celebration was the dedication of the new parish education building on November 9, 1958. Pastor Pertner wrote the poem "Only Three Windows" in memory of the dedication of our memorial windows on May 2, 1954. On April 4, 1959, Pastor L. H. Pertner, the founder of Zion Lutheran Church, was given the honorary title of Pastor Emeritus, and he and his wife received a monthly retirement stipend for the rest of their lives. Pastor Fox was now called to be our regular pastor. Then the 1960s arrived in Ferndale, Michigan. On January 10, 1960, the new parsonage at 1147 Earl Boulevard had been built and dedicated during the morning service. The decision to build a new parsonage was made after considering the cost of redecorating and renovating the house next to the church versus a new building a short distance away. The new parsonage was purchased at a cost of $25,000. Pictured are the old parsonage on church grounds, and a picture showing how the space was converted into our parking lot. In 1961, it was decided that it would be beneficial to employ a student intern for a couple of years, after which time the congregation could decide to call an assistant minister. Vicar Terry Cromwell was assigned in 1962, and Vicar Roger Maccabee in 1963. The pictures of these confirmation classes of the 1960s show Pastor Fox plus the two interns. In 1962, the church finally replaced the old Hammond organ. They purchased a new 17-rank Moeller pipe organ at a cost of $22,000. The organ was dedicated on December 15th, 1963, and a dedication recital was given on January 12, 1964. Pastor Fox accepted a call to another church in Ohio in August of 1964. From then until January 31, 1965, the congregation was without a full-time pastor. In addition, there was a shortage of ministerial candidates, so we were without interns as well. Many of the duties fell upon the shoulders of our church president, Mr. Joe Mahan. The Reverend George Halstead was installed as our pastor in January of 1965. Vicar Dean Peterson began serving his internship on July 1, 1966. On August 1, 1967, Charles D. Peterson became our fourth vicar. In the spring of 1968, the church called Reverend Dean Peterson as our assistant minister. Here is a picture of Joe Mahan, our church council president, as well as the special confirmation class of 1967 and the confirmation class of 1969. In 1966, about 30 families of our church began to underwrite the cost of a radio broadcast. It was called Inspiration on station WLDM-FM on Sunday afternoons. The Reverend George Halstead was the program speaker. Pictured are bulletin covers from the 1960s. Reverend Dean Peterson and his wife Karen were young and lively and a breath of fresh air to a congregation full of young people. The church calendar included picnics, church council retreats, and even dramatics. Zion continued with its history of bowling, one of Reverend Pertner's favorite pastimes, and Lutheran camp. In 1969, 6 large stained glass windows were given to the church by Mrs. Dorothy Rancière. These windows portray 6 scenes from the life of Christ. 1, the birth of Jesus. 2, the baptism of Jesus. 3, the boy Jesus in the temple. 4, the crucifixion of Jesus. 5, the resurrection of Jesus. And 6, the ascension of Jesus. Below is a picture of Mrs. Dorothy Rancière. By the 1970s, it was time for many upgrades to the church. 1970, new roof and a new baptismal font. 1971, new suspended altar cross. 1972, stained glass windows installed in the balcony. 1973, new church lounge with kitchenette in the education wing. 1974, new brass processional cross. 1976, the PA system was completed. 1977, new exterior bulletin board purchased and installed in brick foundation on the lawn of the church facing Woodward Avenue. 1979, 375 copies of the new Lutheran Book of Worship were purchased. On this page, you will see pictures of Zion Lutheran Church in the newspapers during the 1970s. In 1973, it was time to celebrate our golden anniversary, Zion Lutheran Church from 1923 to 1973. You will also see a picture of the various ministers who had worked at Zion during her 50 years. Dean Peterson, Terry Cromwell, James Fox, Roger Maccabee, visiting minister Dr. Norman Mentor, and George Halstead. Our golden anniversary was celebrated with a special booklet on our history. It should be noted that this booklet was used extensively in the writing of our centennial history. The church also organized a golden anniversary banquet. You will see pictured the program for the banquet, as well as napkins which were used during the banquet, and several pictures of people enjoying the banquet. There were several special services presented in honor of Zion's 50th birthday. This sheet of paper shows the costs incurred during this celebration year. They were astonishing. Pastor L.H. Pertner was called from this life on May 22, 1970. He was not only the founder of our congregation, he was instrumental in organizing the Ferndale Public Library. Pertner and our congregation were also involved in the establishment of 2 other missions in the Detroit district, Trinity Lutheran in Clawson and Truth Lutheran in Detroit. On Sunday, October 17, 1976, we celebrated the 53rd anniversary of the establishment of Zion Lutheran Church in Ferndale. This day was also chosen by the congregation to celebrate the retirement of the mortgage on the church building in the education wing with a mortgage burning. Bishop Robert Wiedelman, president of the Michigan District of the American Lutheran Church, conducted the service, and the congregation witnessed the burning of the mortgage by Ika Pertner, widow of Zion's founder. In November of 1974, our assistant pastor, Dean Peterson, accepted a call to another church, and on September 1, 1976, Pastor Halstead resigned and returned to a position in the business world. On February 6, 1977, after 5 months without a pastor, we celebrated the installation of Pastor Paul F. Gateman. He was a graduate of Capital University, and he brought his wife Eve and children, Matthew and Lori, with him. He would serve as our pastor for 41 years. This is a wedding anniversary photo from the late 70s. Pictured are Bill and Shirley Nesseth, Harry and Fran Van Fossen, John and Edith Bender, Mel and Marnie Smith, and Don and Ann Schneider. Zion often celebrated milestone anniversaries during church services. The 1980s rolled out with a new directory with a message from Pastor Gateman. If you look at the numbers in both the church council and the religious education staff, you will see why I was impressed. October of 1983, we celebrated our 60th anniversary as Zion Lutheran Church. Pictured are a bulletin, as well as Paul Gateman with Ika Pertner celebrating 60 years, and a snapshot of Ika Pertner, Marge Pertner, and Eve Gateman. Here is a letter from Pastor Dean A. Peterson congratulating Zion on its 60th anniversary. 1983 also included many celebrations of the 500th anniversary of the birth of Martin Luther. Zion Lutheran Church in the news again. A Tribune article on our celebration of 60 years, and a happy 90th birthday to Ika Pertner. This is Zion Lutheran Church's directory of 1984. Some of the advertisers are still a part of our Ferndale community. For example, Como's and Dr. Leonard Crane and Dr. Howard Crane, optometrists. In 1987, we were happy to celebrate his 10th anniversary of service to Zion Lutheran Church. Many thanks to Pastor Paul Gateman, his wife Eve, and their children Matt and Lori. Here is the church directory for 1988. It paid tribute to Zion Lutheran Church and its 65 years of service to the city of Ferndale, Michigan. Our directory included many pictures sharing the joys of being members of the Zion family. The Daily Tribune featured the Sacred Stitchers who created our 65th anniversary quilt. In the 80s, Zion continued the ever-popular Men's Night Out, which was celebrated with dinner and cards. Dinner made by the ladies, of course. The 1990s were a decade of education. You will see pictures featuring the Sunday schools, Vacation Bible schools, and the youth gathering. And the 1990s were a decade of celebrations. You'll see pictured a ladies' tea, the Zion Olympics, a picnic service, Advent by candlelight, and funeral luncheons. And even more celebrations. You'll see talent shows, coffee hours, Christmas parties, the cookie walk, and a council retreat. Some celebrations were bigger than others. Celebrate 20 years Paul F. Gateman's ordination, June 13th, 1970. In 1998, Zion Lutheran Church celebrated its 75th anniversary. Marge Pertner received this cross-stitch in honor of her father, Zion's original pastor, Louis H. Pertner. The theme for our 1994 directory was joy, which you can see in the directory photos. Joy in Zion, children bring joy, joy is ageless. The Many Faces of Sunday School in 1995. You will see pictured the 1998 Zion Lutheran Church directory. There's a sweet, sweet spirit in Zion Lutheran Church. And it's the Spirit of the Lord. Worship notes: generosity, tolerance, and forgiveness are timeless virtues that need rediscovery. Zion's mission statement: Zion Lutheran's commitment is to glorify God by reaching out to our family and community to provide a Christian atmosphere through spiritual growth, learning, and service. In 1993, Zion lost their minister of music to AIDS. During this time, the Spirit of the Lord truly worked in and through Zion Lutheran Church and its members. Zion mourned his death, and many members began to change the way they viewed sexuality and gender. They were on the road to becoming a more inclusive congregation. Zion dedicated this harpsichord to James Prophet, a man of music. New Year's Eve of 1999 had many people worried. What would happen to computers when the year 2000 arrived? We called this the Y2K phenomenon. Thanks to extensive preparations, all was well on the stroke of midnight, and Zion kept on growing. In the 2000s, many church members became involved in our prayer shawl ministry. People were then blessed with shawls as gifts when they were in need of prayer. At this farewell tea for Edith Bender in 2004, Marge Pertner was pouring tea. Later, the shawl ministry was able to gift Edith with a prayer shawl in her new home. Easter of 2001, our congregation rejoices because He is risen. He is risen indeed. Easter of 2001, beautiful brunch, beautiful congregation. At the end of 2002, Dr. Muhlendyke became interested in the benefits of African drumming, musically, physically, and spiritually uplifting to a congregation. He wrote a proposal, and we received a grant for renewing worship from the Calvin Institute of Christian Worship. From 2003 to 2004, Zion brought the joys of African drumming and dancing to many people in the Detroit metropolitan area. Thanks to the expert help of Mark Stone, a percussion and world music professor from Oakland University, Kofi Amiya, a member of the Pan-African Orchestra, and Sandy Amiya, an African dancing instructor, we were able to uplift worship through music in the spirit by using instruments, voice, and movement. You will see pictured our drumming circles. Here is a picture of the poster that was presented at the Calvin Institute of Worship in Kalamazoo. It showed how we were blessed by the grant that allowed us and enabled us to use African drumming as part of our worship. We are so fortunate that Dale Gaydon has continued our drumming ensemble at Zion Lutheran Church. On May 21, 2005, Zion became the first ELCA church to call and regularly ordain an openly LGBTQ pastor, Dr. John Muhlendyke. He had served as lay pastoral assistant since 2000. At his ordination, Dr. Muhlendyke honored those who were not allowed to participate in ministry in the past by having an empty vestment carried down the aisle of Zion Church. In 2006, Zion adopted the RIC, or Reconciling in Christ program. The Reconciling in Christ program recognizes congregations and Lutheran organizations that declare themselves welcoming to all people, regardless of sexual orientation or gender identity. All are welcome at Zion, and all means all. In 2007, we published a new directory. There are pictures of our Sunday mornings and our church staff. Fellowship is always fun at Zion, as you can see in these pictures. In 2008, Zion welcomed members of Truth Lutheran in Detroit, which had closed in 2007. This church had ties to Zion in that it was funded by Reverend Louis Pertner. Its altar, baptismal font, chairs, and other items are now housed at Zion. Licensed minister Walter Jackson served in Zion's worship and the visitation ministry until his death in 2014. Whether it's a ladies' tea, Bible study, boxcar loading, church picnic, or a social hour sponsored by the Good for Your Soul gang, fellowship is a big part of Zion's family. Summertime is Vacation Bible School time. At this VBS, Zion's parking lot became a marketplace in Jerusalem, and Pastor Gateman became... The 2000s were a big decade for ELCA gatherings. In 2000, there was the trip to St. Louis. In 2003, the trip to Atlanta. In 2006, the trip to San Antonio. And in 2009, the gathering in New Orleans, or NOLA. 2010, a new decade equals a new directory. The 2012 directory includes a comprehensive history of our church. Zion's rich history is pictured, and our story goes on. Pastor Paul Gateman retired and became Pastor Emeritus in 2017. He served as our pastor for 41 years. We truly were blessed. Our Luther League continues. Here are pictures from the gathering in Detroit of 2012 and the confirmation of one of our church members. Zion's music ministry includes chancel choir, children's choir, bell choir. Our incredible organist is Scott Schroeder. Note the close-up on the socks. In March of 2018, Zion welcomed Pastor Matthew Bodie. Pastor Matthew Bodie has been ordained since August of 2002. He was the founding pastor of Spirit of Hope, a Lutheran Episcopal congregation in the Woodbridge, Corktown neighborhoods of Detroit. He is the proud father of two daughters, Michaela Johnson Leggett and Mikhail Butler Leggett. Pastor Bodie and his children are residents of Detroit. On April 29, 2018, Reverend Matthew Bodie was installed as the pastor of Zion Lutheran Church. Pastor Bodie led us through the end of this decade. Thanks to Pastor Bodie, we have started the Halloween tradition of Trunk or Treat. Thanks to Pastor Bodie, Zion became involved with the Ferndale Pride Fest. Thanks to Pastor Bodie, we made it through the pandemic. He started our Zoom services, which we continue to use. We also had outdoor services for Christmas Eve. There were masks made by Stacy Jameson, which pictured our Zion Lutheran logo. And we got to hear Pastor Paul's final sermon via a Zoom service. Thanks to Pastor Bodie, we get to hear trombone choirs at church. Pastor Paul Gateman was dedicated to serving the Lord. He had an incredible sense of humor, birthday cards. He also loved selling hot dogs for the Woodward Dream Cruise, Gettysburg, all kids, and especially his family. Reverend Paul Gateman, March 8, 1945 through May 4th, 2021. Zion Lutheran Church, 1923 through 2023, a century of blessings, celebrating 100 years of ministry. We thank our Liturgical Arts Committee for the many beautiful decorations they created in celebration of 100 years and counting. For surely I know the plans I have for you, plans for your future welfare, to give you a future with hope. We celebrate our centennial with ice cream. I scream, you scream for centennial ice cream. We have that Zion spirit. God's work, our hands. As you complete this Zion history, think about the following. How have you been blessed by Zion? What drew you to Zion? What do you like about Zion? What do you see in Zion's future? What do we see in Zion's future? We see you. Thank you for being a part of the history of Zion Lutheran Church and its sweet, sweet spirit. Glory to God in the highest. God bless us, everyone.